Donald Trump built his political image on one simple promise: America would never become trapped in another endless Middle East conflict. He promised strength without surrender, pressure without occupation, and victories without long wars. But today, one of America's most influential geopolitical thinkers, John Mearsheimer, believes that promise has collided with reality. According to Mearsheimer, the battlefield has changed in a way Washington never expected. This isn't just about missiles. This isn't just about sanctions. This is about strategy, and strategy may be the one battlefield where Iran has gained the advantage. While headlines focus on explosions and military strikes, something much bigger has been happening behind the scenes. Iran has shown that it can absorb pressure, continue operating, and force its opponents into difficult political and military choices rather than delivering the quick collapse many expected. That changes everything, because every option now appears costly. Escalate the conflict and risk a wider regional war with unpredictable economic and political consequences. Pull back, and critics may argue that years of pressure achieved less than promised. Negotiate and face accusations of making concessions after months of confrontation. According to Mearsheimer's realist view of international politics, this is exactly how strategic traps develop. They don't begin with a single battle. They emerge when every available choice carries serious consequences, leaving leaders with no clear path to a decisive victory. Meanwhile, Iran continues signaling that it can endure a prolonged confrontation while maintaining influence across the region. Rather than seeking immediate victory, Tehran appears focused on making any prolonged conflict increasingly expensive for its opponents. That is why this moment matters, because the question is no longer who can launch the most powerful strike. The real question is who can outlast the other. And according to John Mearsheimer, that may be the question Washington never wanted to answer. In today's video, we'll examine Mearsheimer's arguments, compare them with recent developments, and explore why he believes Iran's latest moves have placed President Trump in one of the most difficult strategic positions of his presidency. Stay with us, because the deeper we go into this story, the more surprising the geopolitical picture becomes. Iran JSTDID. If John Mearsheimer is right, then the biggest surprise in this conflict isn't a single missile strike or one military operation. It's that Iran appears to have changed the strategic equation. For years, many in Washington believed relentless economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and military pressure would eventually force Tehran to make major concessions. The expectation was simple: increase the pressure, and Iran would eventually have to back down. But according to Mearsheimer, that outcome has not materialized. Instead, Iran has focused on endurance rather than quick victories. Rather than trying to defeat the United States in a conventional military sense, it has sought to raise the costs of prolonged confrontation and demonstrate that it can continue operating under pressure. That changes the nature of the conflict, because wars are not decided only by military strength. They are also decided by political will, economic resilience, and the ability to outlast an opponent. Mearsheimer argues that this is where Iran has gained leverage Every additional month of confrontation creates new pressures. Energy markets react. Regional allies become more cautious. Military resources remain tied down. Domestic political debates intensify. And the longer uncertainty continues, the harder it becomes for any government to claim a clear and decisive victory. From Tehran's perspective, simply surviving under sustained pressure can become a strategic success. That doesn't necessarily mean Iran has won. It means the original objectives of its opponents become more difficult to achieve. Mearsheimer believes this is why President Trump now faces a series of difficult choices. Escalating military action could increase the risk of a broader regional conflict. Reducing military pressure could be portrayed by critics as backing away from earlier objectives. Negotiating a compromise may be politically controversial after months of confrontation. In other words, each option carries significant costs. This is why Mearsheimer describes the situation as a strategic trap, not because one side has achieved total victory, but because the available paths forward have all become increasingly complicated. And perhaps the most important point is this: Iran's strategy appears to be based less on dramatic battlefield victories and more on patience. If time itself becomes a strategic weapon, then the country that expected a quick resolution may instead find itself managing a conflict with no easy ending. That is the question now facing Washington, not whether it can apply more pressure, but whether more pressure will actually produce a different result. And according to John Mearsheimer, that is the question policymakers may have underestimated from the very beginning. Copar 3 BUHY MR SAMR SOIS TRMPAS OPDOS. This is where John Mearsheimer believes the real dilemma begins. In his view, the question is no longer whether the United States has overwhelming military power. Few analysts dispute that it does. The real question is whether military superiority automatically produces the political outcome Washington wants. According to Mearsheimer, history suggests the answer is often no. He points to conflicts where powerful nations achieved impressive battlefield results, but struggled to translate those victories into lasting political success. Military force can destroy infrastructure and weaken an opponent's capabilities, but it does not always compel governments to change their long-term strategic goals. That is why, in Mearsheimer's realist framework, the current situation is so difficult. Imagine the choices facing the White House. Option 1 is to intensify military operations. Supporters argue that stronger pressure could further weaken Iran's military capabilities and deter future attacks. But critics warn that a larger campaign could increase the risk of regional escalation, draw in additional actors, and prolong instability across the Middle East. Option 2 is to reduce military pressure and pursue diplomacy. That path could lower immediate tensions and create opportunities for negotiations. Yet politically, it could also be portrayed by opponents as abandoning earlier objectives or rewarding a government that resisted years of pressure. Then there is a third possibility: continue the current strategy. Neither dramatically escalate nor significantly de-escalate. But Mearsheimer argues this may simply extend a costly standoff, consuming time, resources, and political attention without producing a decisive outcome. In other words, every road comes with serious trade-offs. And that, according to his analysis, is what defines a strategic trap. Not defeat, not surrender, but the absence of a clear, low-cost path to achieving your objectives. At the same time, regional dynamics continue to evolve. Neighboring countries are balancing their own security concerns. Global energy markets remain sensitive to instability. Major powers are closely watching every move, calculating how the conflict could reshape alliances and influence far beyond the Middle East. For President Trump, every decision now carries consequences that extend well beyond Iran itself. A military decision affects diplomacy. A diplomatic decision affects domestic politics. An economic decision influences global markets. Everything is connected. That is why Mearsheimer argues this confrontation is no longer just a bilateral dispute between Washington and Tehran. It has become a broader geopolitical contest over influence, credibility, and long-term strategy. Whether one agrees with his conclusions or not, his central argument is difficult to ignore. The most dangerous moments in international politics are not always when one side is clearly winning or losing. They are when powerful nations face a series of difficult choices, each carrying significant risks, and none offering an obvious path to success. And if that assessment is correct, then the next decisions made in Washington and in Tehran could shape the Middle East for years to come. But the biggest question still remains unanswered. What happens if neither side is willing to back down? That's where this story becomes even more consequential. Panfe Part 4, Shapis, IFNE Arsaidi BCKS Dodu Owen. This is the moment that could define the future of the Middle East. For months, the world has watched military operations, political statements, and diplomatic efforts unfold almost daily. But according to John Mearsheimer's analysis, the biggest danger may not be a single dramatic event. It may be a prolonged confrontation in which neither Washington nor Tehran is willing to make the first major concession. History shows that international crises often become most dangerous when both sides believe that stepping back could be interpreted as weakness. That creates a cycle. One action leads to another. One response triggers another response. And before long, events begin moving faster than policymakers intended. Mearsheimer argues that great powers must think beyond immediate military victories. They must ask a harder question. What does the political endgame actually look like? If there is no realistic path to a stable political settlement, then even successful military operations may fail to produce lasting strategic gains. This is why the current situation has attracted attention from governments around the world. European leaders are watching closely because any prolonged instability could affect energy supplies, inflation, and regional security. Countries across the Middle East are carefully balancing their relationships, trying to avoid being drawn into a wider confrontation. Meanwhile, China and Russia are observing developments through the lens of global power competition, evaluating how shifts in the region could influence the international balance. In today's interconnected world, a regional crisis rarely stays regional. Financial markets react. Energy prices can fluctuate. Shipping routes become more vulnerable. Diplomatic alliances face new pressures. Every decision carries consequences far beyond the battlefield. For President Trump, the challenge is therefore larger than winning a military contest. It is about achieving an outcome that advances U.S. strategic objectives while limiting the risks of a broader conflict. For Iran, the challenge is different. Its goal, according to many analysts, is not necessarily to defeat the United States militarily, but to demonstrate resilience, preserve its influence, and increase the costs of sustained pressure. Whether that strategy ultimately succeeds remains an open question. No one can predict with certainty how this confrontation will end. Future decisions by both governments and by regional actors will shape what comes next. That is why Mearsheimer's argument continues to generate debate. He contends that in international politics, raw military power alone does not guarantee strategic success. Political objectives, alliances, public support, economic endurance, and diplomacy all matter, sometimes even more than the battlefield itself. Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, one thing is clear: the choices made in the coming weeks and months could have consequences that extend far beyond Washington and Tehran. They could influence the security architecture of the Middle East, the global economy, and the direction of international politics for years to come. What do you think? Has the strategic balance shifted, as Mearsheimer argues? Or do you believe the United States still holds decisive leverage? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our in-depth coverage of global affairs, geopolitics, and the stories shaping our world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Panfi Final Part Cowensel Usom. As the dust settles, one fact becomes increasingly clear. This story is no longer just about Donald Trump or Iran. It is about the changing nature of global power. John Mearsheimer argues that the world has entered an era where military superiority alone cannot guarantee political success. In his realist view, wars are ultimately decided not just by firepower, but by endurance, alliances, economic resilience, public support, and the ability to achieve lasting political objectives. Whether his assessment proves correct remains to be seen. What is certain is that the choices made by Washington, Tehran, and their allies in the months ahead could shape the Middle East and the wider international order for years to come. Will diplomacy find a path forward? Will tensions ease? Or will both sides continue down a course that carries ever greater risks? Those questions remain unanswered. One decision, one unexpected event, or one diplomatic breakthrough could change the course of history overnight. That's why every statement from world leaders, every military movement, and every negotiation will continue to be watched by governments, financial markets, and millions of people around the world. The stakes are no longer regional. They are global. If you've stayed with us to the end, thank you for watching. If you found this analysis informative, be sure to adhere, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our in-depth coverage of geopolitics, world affairs, and the biggest stories shaping our future. And now we want to hear from you. Erse, do you agree with John Mearsheimer's analysis that the current situation has left President Trump facing extremely difficult strategic choices? Or do you believe the United States still has clear options moving forward? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Until next time, stay informed, question every narrative, and we'll see you in the next report.